All right, everybody. I've got a very special guest for you. Everybody, please welcome to the show, Josh Blaylock. Welcome, Josh.
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me.
It's my brand new studio audience. Uh, so, Josh, first time on the show. So, I'd love to hear a little bit of your background, your origin story. What got you into this world of comics that we love so much?
Man, I got into comics many years ago, over 25 years ago. I was a teenager, desperately wanted to get into the industry. And then as soon as high school ended, I started self-publishing. And about 5 years later, I finally was able to go full time. And that's when I had gotten the license to G.I. Joe, when it had been dormant for about 7 years. And we did a partnership with Image Comics. So Devil's Due, my company, launched that back into the fold, which started the whole like 80s retro wave. That was the first comic of its kind, and it blew up. And that put us on the map and me on the map. And then I wrote that for the first 2 years. I oversaw the whole project and updated and designed characters, things like that. Then I continued to create and write other projects while being the publisher. And yeah, we did G.I. Joe for 7 years. We brought back Voltron. We did Joe versus Transformers. We had I've published about 1,000 books in my day, I guess, and then including several creator-owned properties and a lot of my own stuff. So primarily these days, it's my main ongoing, my main continually running series is Mercy Sparks, a supernatural action story about a devil girl that works for Heaven, hunting rogue angels. I do some sci-fi books, kind of done a little bit of everything, and most recently announced the Disavowed with Massive.
So, it's a rule I have. We can't bring up Devil's Due without me saying Squarriors was an awesome book, and I absolutely love that series.
Yeah, that was one of those creator-owned books that, yeah, man, that was some phenomenal stuff.
So you said, if I remember my G.I. Joe history correctly, and just so you know, because the audience should know by now, I am actually a recent convert to G.I. Joe, and it is the newest Skybound series that really invigorated something in me to really just love that series and that IP to the point where I'm like trying to go back and read the old Larry Hama books and everything, and just finding everything I can G.I. Joe. But if I remember correctly, so Image had it for a little bit, and then it went over to IDW, and now it's back over at Image. Is that correct?
No, things are a blur. Like that's because it's been so much time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I get the math in my head, back in the back of my brain. So it was around the end of 2000 that I started negotiating with Hasbro because the property had been dead, and secured all that and got that in 2001. Then from there, I went and I did the deal with Image Comics once Devil's Due had secured the license. Because at the time, this is like hard for people to really like to get to believe now, but nobody wanted to do 80s stuff. Everyone, all of the powers that be, all the publishers, retailers, everybody were primarily like, why would anybody want that? And if you were into that, and you're the right demographic for it, you were sitting there just like dying, like, well, when are they going to bring this stuff back? And then, so that's why I was so like certain that I had a hit on my hands, if it was done right. But yeah, I got that. We did the deal with Image and came out September 2001. And it was a huge hit. I mean, we blew through well over 100,000 copies, multiple printings. Only had one, we didn't even have any variant covers the first time. And then just, so we were at Image for 2 years. We ended up really blowing up. We had a ton of books. It was a different regime there at the time, different leadership, and it wasn't really set up for, for a studio. So we kind of overgrew it, just couldn't really fit in the system they had there at the time. And so I had always been a publisher prior to that for many years. I just wasn't as known outside of the indies, black and white indie comic circle.
Mhm.
So then, we just, continued like normal, but now we were into the Diamond Catalog publishing. We had several other books. I mean, um, we had a lot of our own creator-owned stuff. A lot of really well-known creators started their work through Devil's Due. Like Tim Seeley was one, who was one of the bullpen artists. I launched Hack Slash through through Devil's Due. We had the licenses like Voltron and um, our all the Joe stuff, Voltron stuff. We had some other Hasbro stuff like Dungeons and Dragons, Dragonlance, Forgotten Realms. We had the Family Guy license, Child's Play license. I mean, a ton of stuff. That was all Devil's Due. But back to the GI Joe question, yeah, we continued to do that for a solid like 7 years. That included 4 different GI Joe versus Transformers miniseries. Secondary, like there was the Joe series with 43 issues. Then it continued into 30 something issues of just a different title, America's Elite, same continuity, all based off the old Marvel continuity. There was G.I. Joe Frontline, which was kind of like our special missions. There was one shots and all kind. I think all in all, it was about 4,000 pages of stuff. So when they do those compendiums, it's going to be almost, if not as much stuff as Marvel, as far as content goes. And all this stuff was like, I mean, it was a big deal at the time, and everyone in comics, saw that in the stores constantly who was into that. But it literally all kind of wrapped up right as social media, really blew up and became the main way people get their information. So when you just go do a quick Google search for something for it now, it's kind of funny. It's easy to miss a lot of stuff. A lot of our press was in a lot of the magazines, and it just sort of like when IDW got it, of course, like intentionally, like no mention of us, because why would you mention, the old guys? And they're hyping up their thing, and they did it for 13 years. So I haven't touched that stuff in like 14 years, I guess. Yeah, we did it for almost a decade.
That's awesome. I mean, yeah, I look forward to. I mean, no offense to you, but like Larry Hama is always the name that pops up when you think GI Joe, and when I started getting into it recently, I immediately was like, where is that Real American Hero series? Why haven't we republished it? And now we're finally getting them. And to hear that possibly your stuff's in there too, that'll be a treat after getting through some of the older material. I also have to. You're hitting a lot of buttons for me right now. So you mentioned Hasbro, and we have to mention real quick the best Hasbro property, my favorite Hasbro property, Rom the Space Knight. Did you have anything to do with Rom at that time, or was that even a thought?
No, man, I didn't, but I was asked about it so much because we had the Micronauts license, and I was working directly with the company Abrams Gentili Entertainment, who were the original owners of Micronauts. So they everybody was like, "Where's Rom? Where's Rom?" All these different Marvel characters, and we had to say like, "No, we can't use any of those." Then years later, when more time had passed, and I don't remember the sequence of these events, but either it was just further conversations happening with Marvel, or it was when Hasbro actually turned around and started, they gobbled everything up, ended up buying Micronauts. And at some point, it was possible for IDW to pull off that crossover, which I think happened largely because I think it was Chris Royale really forced that into happening, like just through sheer will. If I heard that right in an interview once.
Yeah, him and Christos Gage were like big backers of getting Rom back into the spotlight in some way, and they pulled off some really cool Rom books over there at the time.
But at the time when we had it, it was not a Hasbro property.
Oh, okay. I guess my Rom history is off.
Don't quote me on that one. I reserve the right to strike that from the record.
It's funny too. You can't really see it, but I'm wearing my Rom shirt right now. And
nice.
Anytime I have an opportunity to bring that up, it's like people need to go. I love those books so much. But
people that like Rom, man, love Rom.
Yeah, it's That's good stuff, man. It needs to come back. I'm glad Marvel's reprinting the old Marvel series. Those not compendiums, they're on the buy, are fantastic and really well done. But I'd love to see him get another shot at something.
We did end up doing several things with Larry Hama too, just for people who are digging down the rabbit holes too. Like he did the Frontline miniseries, which connected the Marvel, the in gap between the Marvel run and the run that we started, and then well, he also did the G.I. Joe Declassified, which actually fleshed out the origin story more of the Joes in the early years. Did some other fun stuff too. He did Barack the Barbarian, Quest for the Treasure of Stimuli. We did a book called Oxido with Pablo Raimondi and him, and a book called Spooks, which was like CIA spooks meets like fighting monsters, kind of like we did in Helsing. That was all fun stuff.
And can I ask you were doing Devil's Due at the time. Was Devil's Due just not capable of handling that much going on, and that way you went to Image, or how did that partnership come about?
No, when I started, no, I was very, very small at that time. I had been publishing a couple of different independent books. I had what sort of set me up to have this expertise and this weird set of skills, at a young age, was I had, despite being like obsessive about wanting to be in comics since I was like 12, I had fallen into a day job where I was after art school, where I was like, helping produce like T-shirts and apparel and stuff that were attached to licenses, and I got to spearhead a whole line of 80s retro stuff through this company I worked for, and it like really put that company on the map. And they were the first ones to bring back all kinds of 80s cartoon stuff, and it was a huge hit. It got in like Hot Topic, and at the time there was stores everywhere called Gadzooks, and pretty much every like early 2000s shopping mall or late 90s shopping mall you can imagine, and all the stores were flooded with those shirts. We were the ones that did that, and that gave me the knowledge on how to write those proposals, so, and it was a super, like, it was a dope job, but I just was still miserable because it wasn't comic books, and that's all I cared about. So I thought maybe I could actually use this, to do something I'm really passionate about and get one of the licenses. And G.I. Joe just made the most sense because it was, such a history entrenched in the comic book world. And it had been just so dormant, like the 90s cartoon, the bomb. When they brought back like the Dark Horse one, they tried to bring that back. They just didn't understand the fan base. That was a big flop. So fans were just dying for it to come back the right way. And, so I went for that. And, kind of to my shock, Hasbro emailed me back. They answered, I started answering their questions. They offered me a crazy, like, egregious royalty. And I just said yes to it because, that's what it was going to have to be done. And, I got the deal. So then I went to Image. I knew that if I'd gone to anybody before that, one, all of the publishers were like, why would we want to do this? And then if I educated them on why to do it, then who the hell am I? I'm this like 22-year-old, 23-year-old guy that has never done anything that they know of. So they're just going to pat me on the head, say, thanks, kid. Maybe they'll let me write an issue or something a year later, and that's it. So I had to get the license first. And then I went to Matt Hawkins first. He's talked about this before, and he's like, well, we don't really do licenses, and then went to Image Central. And from everything I've been told, Jim Valentino really didn't want to do it, but for some reason internally they were like, no, you should do this. And so they agreed to it, and then it took on a life of its own from that point. So then I had coordinated to make sure that I'd worked out a deal with J. Scott Campbell to do the covers, because he had been getting like, spotlighted in all these Wizard magazine double page spread articles that were fantasizing about the 80s coming back. And they were like out every single month. They don't have like the top artists drawing like fanfic pictures basically. And that's why it's another shock that like on the retail side, they weren't ready for this, because this is what all the fandom was obsessing over. And so, yeah, Campbell was like, yeah, I'll totally do these covers. He agreed to do it like on the back end. And then I had these amazing paintings lined up by this artist from Cincinnati named David Michael Beck. He's just this like legendary, you know, commercial art painter who segued into comic books. And he did that super realistic like snake eyes painting, kind of unlike any style anyone had seen it in before. And we just dropped those on message boards. The Wizard magazine articles hit right at the time when the licenses dropped, because I had those reporters ready to go. And then boom, like all of the fans were calling in those shops to, you know, placing pre-orders. The retailers are telling Diamond about it, you know, and Image decides, okay, we got to put this on the cover, on the back cover. I mean, on the cover to previews. And then, yeah, it was, I think pre-orders were around 70,000 copies, and I talked them into going ahead and printing 100,000. And it was like just sold out instantly. And from there, you know, it was kind of off to the races. So, but that's when, because I had this long history of years of publishing, I was ready to go. Like, this was my dream. And I grew up idolizing, on top of it, I grew up idolizing like the Image guys. And so I'm there, I got a studio working with, you know, through there. And they slowed me down. Like, they only let us put out the first 4 issues bi-monthly. So, which I get it, you know, you don't know who this person is, and, you know, but they didn't realize, not only me, but everyone that worked for me that I started bringing in slowly was all super serious, like young people, about wanting to be in this industry and getting things out on time and everything. Yeah. So in hindsight, you know, when the book's selling that much, it probably cost us like $400,000 that first year. So the company could have brought in. We kicked off right away with supplementary books and other series, and then we just started, you know, plus I came from the indie world of wanting to always just do my own stuff. You know, I never really had a dream to, you know, draw Batman. So I was ready to put on my own books, and then the 80s license thing just blew up. So I had a relationship with the Voltron people because of the t-shirt thing, and we set that up. Micronauts just kind of came to us because they were like, hey, you guys are doing, you know, all this crazy 80s stuff. Let's talk. And from there, you know, just kind of took on a life of its own. And for a while, you know, we had, it was just me, and then I'd get an assistant. And then from there, started getting a small crew. Tim Seeley was one of the first artists I was able to hire full-time and relocate from somewhere. Ended up relocating a few other people, and yeah, it's all a blur now.
I was gonna say, 22-year-old kid. I don't want to tell you what I was doing at 22. How fast is your head spinning through all this? Like, you obviously had a vision and a good idea, but there's a ton of risk going across this as well for both you, Image, basically everybody on board with this. So, are you cool, calm, and collected? Like, I knew this was going to happen, or are you just like, I can't fucking believe what's going on right now, or somewhere in between?
Most of the stuff somewhere in between. I'd say with G.I. Joe in the beginning, though, the reason why I was able to do that was the certainty. It was more of the attitude of like, I'm sorry you don't understand how well this is going to do. I'll talk to you like in a year. You know, like this just, I can't sit here and explain to you if you don't get it. You know, you just don't understand. And then it was just constantly getting hit with dealing with the shock later of how much people didn't get it, or were still, the whole first wave, this is something anybody who worked at Devil's Due at the time when we were first starting out could probably attest to. It was, once it took off and it was a huge hit, then it became this thing of like all of like the, you know, Simpsons comic book store guys kind of rolling their eyes like, oh, well, it's just like 80s stuff, whatever, blah, blah. Okay, waiting for when's this fad going to be over, and when are these, and of course you're the overnight success story to everybody, not knowing like you've been trying to do this for like 6 years. And
In their defense too, they just lived through the 90s. So
yeah, to them, and then now in my age, when I blink and I'm like, oh, that shit, that was something was 6 years ago, and I think it was a year ago. That's to them the '90s thing. It just happened a day ago,
yeah.
and really it had been, many years. But it 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 was just funny because it was like, all this stuff is retro. I mean, Spider-Man in the 2000s was, well, he was a popular, it wasn't just a comic book, he was a popular cartoon series, he was a popular cheesy TV show for a while. And that's why, and it was constant continuation of people getting into it and then kind of finding the comics and staying into it and having these cycles. And when it came to the first ever of their kind, these 80s sort of cartoon archetypes that hadn't existed before, like where they came out of the toy world and they were bombarded to everyone through cartoons and merchandise and everything. They hadn't had their first generational cycle yet. And I used to try to, I actually got interviewed by some like USA Today or something talking about this back then. Like, oh, well, of course, every generational thing has its own nostalgia cycle. And I was trying to explain this is different. Like, 80s nostalgia is not the same as any nostalgia that came before it, because the whole like flywheel of lunchboxes and trapper keepers and pajamas and toys and everything that you ate, slept, and breathed, McDonald's Happy Meals, all in tied in on top of the cartoon, and we're like just so much part of your life. It's like this is going to be bigger than any retro thing that's come before. And now, that said, though, all the guys that were like kind of rolling their eyes at us as like, when's this fad going to be over? And lumping me and the collective into that, had me on the other end going like, no shit. Like, of course this isn't going to last forever. I don't know how, I mean, this is, the hotter it gets, the more it'll probably dip down. And, then we hope we keep going, because we just really always want to do our own stuff on top of that anyway. Even though I love these characters, I didn't get into comics just to do somebody else's stuff. So I'm the last person that thought it would still be going on now in 2024. So I actually was right about it being bigger than anything to come before it when it comes to a nostalgia cycle. But I also was completely, would have completely doubted that we'd still be here, without what is now 40 years later. So now I'm kind of resolved to think, you know what, it's never going to stop really. If you're buying something when you're 43 or 45, you're probably going to still be buying it when you're like 65. Yeah. If it didn't stop from when you were 22 to 39, you're still buying it when you're in your 40s. We're just going to keep buying the stuff, different versions of it, better versions of it. And then, that's just, that's the new way.
Yeah, you'll gain new fans along the way. Like I said, I just got into it. That Duke series was the thing that sold me on G.I. Joe. And it's crazy to think that it just along the way, someone like me never got into it. But
they're doing a phenomenal job, man. They're everything they're doing. When you bring something back like this, the key to it is you have to look at it for the time it's in, where not just like the time and place where the fandom is, where the industry is, and all of that. And they're doing it. They're hitting all the right notes. They're and like they're doing things that if we had done it that way, it would have been just totally slammed. Like the fan base hated Cobra Law back then. Like, had Cobra Law having anything to do with Cobra in the comic books was like, how dare you desecrate our comic book series? Where Cobra Commander is a failed entrepreneur who went domestic terrorist, and he's very charismatic, and now you're just going to say he's a snake man. Like, go to hell. They would have just it would have totally not worked. And like back then, kind of really in the early 2000s, everything was just about like the badassification of everything. Like, you wanted it to appear like like more edgy than it could have been when you were a kid, and you also want it to be what as good as it was in your memory as a kid.
Yeah.
Like
You want it to be what
when
you
you wake up
remember,
and
not what it was.
exactly. You want to be what you remember, not what it was, and a little edgier on top of it. Like that's what the magic was. And now we've kind of done this full circle thing where we've lived through 20 years of edginess and postmodernism, and now it's like, okay, we can have some fun again. We can do the edginess when we want to. We can, but it doesn't have to take itself completely so seriously. It was great, and I don't think there's anybody. I don't know if there's anyone besides Kirkman who could have maybe like had the weight to throw around to like kind of get Hasbro to let it be done the way that it was. I mean, so
yeah, Kirkman's the man. But to what you were saying, to bring it to kind of my fandom, what I think of when you're saying that is, I remember growing up, like you didn't say metachlorians, like that was like
yeah.
that was like saying a racial slur in the Star Wars fandom. And now it's dropped casually and everything. And it's like, yeah, they say M count or whatever, but you know what they're talking about. And yeah, so it's funny the cycles that fandoms go through, where something that is just offensive in every way, and now it's like, oh yeah, we celebrate it now. And
just like right now, and to selfishly bring it back to my own thing, but
yeah,
like I would not bring it back if I was going to relaunch a alt version Elseworlds like continuation of GI Joe based on the Devil's based on the Devil's Due stuff. I would do it a very specific way for where things are now to make it work. And that's why with like something that is a deconstruction, satire, whatever, I have a lot of those archetypes that carry over into the Disavowed. I like is I wouldn't. I'm not trying to like just replicate that. I'm not trying to do like this isn't like, oh, Devil's Due is gonna keep doing GI Joe, or it's got to be something its own different. It's like this has got to be like not oh, you got fired from writing Justice League or something, or you just haven't been doing it for a while and you want to continue it. It's like no, you've got to have a wholly completely different approach. So, but it's the first time that just like the back in the day, like that was the first time these '80s kind of properties had ever been brought back in the nostalgia cycle. Now they really haven't been deconstructed. And there hasn't been anything like that. There's a little bit of it starting with, actually, it's funny enough, it's been like the '90s stuff. So, what Kyle Higgins is doing with, like, Radiant Black and sort of like a Power Rangers kind of a world. And then you've got Tim Seeley with Local Man really diving into the '90s stuff, '90s comics. It hasn't really been done with some of the '80s. So, I'm, instead of trying to pull these characters into the modern world and update them like overnight with this big gap in between, I'm going the other way and saying like, no, this is hardcore '80s, and I'm just leaning all into it. So we're introduced to the concept of the teams that in the 1980s there was a team, the United Five, that was formed to stop a cult that went terrorist with esoteric leanings that went full terrorist with these weird capabilities called Komodo. And we learn about them through the eyes of the child of one of these team members in the late '90s, who stumbles upon like evidence of his dad's involvement in this. And then when we get back to the '80s, it's just full on insanity. We don't need to hold back on like the bare-chested dude with a giant mustache running into battle, and there are laser guns everywhere, and they don't miss everybody. And now in the present day, it's not like that anymore. So things are sort of buttoned up and different and a little more, organized. And kind of like when you hear an old story from an older relative talking about back in the day, and things seem a little more chaotic and Wild West. And that leads us into this little, opens the world of this story, and what later focuses on the Disavowed, who are former members of both teams who started working together for some reason.
So reading about the book beforehand, I was reading a few articles and seeing what people were saying about it. And I think the most common thing I saw, and I want your comment on it because it means something very particular to me when one of these properties is invoked. But what I saw was it's G.I. Joe meets the boys. Would you agree with that? And if so, how do you agree with it or disagree with it?
Yeah. I agree with it on like a nice kind of like light level. Like I wouldn't get into it like it's very one, the boys is the boys and no one's going to do the boys better. Like and it was the first person to really just fully take a twist, not just on superheroes, but on the like the military industrial complex and using superheroes as a reason to tell that story. And this is more the themes in here are more about well, I would say the boys as far as all the fun, gratuitous violence and debauchery and everything else. I don't want to have any restrictions to have to hold back. Some of the stuff might not be as crazy as the, the boys' guts, but
no GI gasms.
Well, there definitely like be some drug use and like some releasing tension zone for running into battle and a bunch of laser guns coming at you. But yeah, no Joe gasms. But I think one, this is it's like spans the whole timeline and kind of thematically plays into what we were just talking about, just on the whole nostalgia level. Like so these things like literally like they just won't die. And parts of this team like refuse to die. And also there's parts of this team that just they can't be like updated. Like you can try and it's gonna have some fun in the story where they've tried to like bring this into the present day in some really failed attempts, but it always keeps going back to like the core crew is that's what they need to get the job done. And that kind of is a theme that plays into lots of popular culture properties and nostalgia. You know, for whatever reason, the most popular thing, change it all you want, do everything, you're still coming back to those core original designs that captivated people back then, and they're still relevant today.
Yeah.
And
it's fun to make Sam Wilson Captain America leading the Avengers for a little bit, but eventually we're getting back to Steve Rogers. Like
just like, you know, yeah, you can have your weird Michael Bay Optimus Prime and you're going to end up going back to the classic. Yeah. But and also there's a lot of, you know, I don't like, when I say there's themes, it's not like I'm trying to necessarily heavy-handedly put all this stuff in there, but it can't help but resonate. So on the same lines as like the nostalgia persisting forever, like there are also things about like big part of the zeitgeist now in people's minds is like people in power not letting go. And that's not just political, it's corporate, it's the corporate world, it's everything.
It's just the world.
There is just the world. There's never been such a stranglehold of like the old powers that be refusing to just let go. And like Gen X is specifically like sort of feels that because like, you know, they never really got to run the world, you know, at the level of like, you know, the boomers. And by the time they are able to, I think they're just going to be like, yeah, whatever, millennials, you do it. You know, Gen Z, you do it. And we'll just play it off like we'll pretend we don't care. I'll be like, whatever.
That too cool for school Gen X attitude.
But you know, there's elements in the story, and when we get into it, that are not going to shy away from satirizing some of that stuff too.
Yeah, I bring that up because I always think when people say meets the boys, like whatever it is, it's this meets the boys. And, you know, I really don't like those elevator pitches because, like, whenever I hear them, it's like The Walking Dead is The Walking Dead. It's not just the zombie thing. Like, you don't say this meets, just say it's a zombie thing. You don't say it meets Walking Dead. But when I hear meets the boys, I don't think as much about the story behind that book because as great as that book is, and it's one of my favorite books of all time, when I hear that comparison, I immediately think of the over-the-top nature of it, the gratuitous violence, the sex, the drugs, the just unabashed, unashamed, like we're going to throw it in your face and really kind of break down these characters. So that's what I was hoping you would say when I said that, which is pretty much what you said, minus Joe-gasms. But yeah,
well,
go ahead.
I've seen some discussions recently that stuck with me as far as like forgetting exactly where they was from. We're talking about these kind of like satire, deconstructions, whatever.
Mhm.
There's the ones that are done like you can tell whether they're done by someone who truly loves the genre, or they just like are making fun of the genre.
Yes.
And like on the boys, it's more like, okay, you know, I don't want to speak for Garth Ennis, and he clearly knows what he's doing, but you don't get the sense that he loves superheroes. You know, this is a guy that found a cool way to tell a superhero story he would enjoy telling, and you know, and hold nothing sacred.
And
Versus
he's also
something like
talking about the
Invincible.
industry. He is pushing the industry to say this industry is fucked and we need to fix it. And that's why I the story I always heard was it was originally published by DC Comics. People may not remember that. And I think it was the first issue, but it's literally a cover of a guy curb stomping a Captain America lookalike. And I think it was Paul Levitz was in charge, and he was just like, the book's great, guys, but like I can't put that on the stands. Like I can't have that as a DC comic book.
Yeah,
and that's why they were going to walk away.
I was actually in the running to possibly like make a bid on that, but I was quickly told we were. I think we maybe in hindsight, it's like of course you're like, oh man, we should have figured out how to do it. Everybody was going after the boys once they found out the DC was losing it.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew the attorney pretty well that reps Garth Ennis, and he said you can't afford it. And I said, well, how do you know? Like when he is just trust me. And I think he already had another deal on the table. So yeah, but that you've got stuff like everything from a silly parody like The Tick to like something like Invincible or Watchmen. Watchmen obviously is more critical of the genre, but it's funny we think about I'm keeping the superhero stuff, but you literally can. It's hard to mention any comic. Almost, it's not like taken from something like that, and like the premise is set up. It's so common to just lift directly from something that came before, but put your little spin on it.
Yeah, exactly. And to kind of move it back to the Disavowed, you've got this book, and I guess my first real big question about it is how do you see somebody? Let me back up. I see three different people in this kind of space right now with G.I. Joe. There's the hardcore G.I. Joe fan that's been here forever, is probably yelling at their phone right now. Chris, how'd you not know about Josh's G.I. Joe revival? There's me, who's like kind of the newer just getting into it, just realizing how great it is and going back and everything. And then there's the person who's never read or watched or even seen the G.I. Joe movie, live action movie. Are any of those three people going to be kind of left out in the Disavowed, or do you feel like you did a good job of bringing everybody in?
I feel like I did a good job of bringing everybody in. I think that if you are a hardcore like fan that's been there since like 1982, like within the first like 5 pages, I feel like you're gonna get all kinds of references and deep cuts, and it's gonna resonate with you, and you'll have certain feels on a whole different level than somebody else would, because you're gonna immediately. You're not gonna just be like, oh, I can see what he's doing here on what you'll get that on a deeper level, but you'll also feel like it's just kind of it is having fun with it, and it is unrestrained, and you can just sort of like you don't have to worry about collecting all the other stuff. You can just enjoy this for what it is, and I can do things that would betray those character archetypes in other stories, and you would be upset if they did that in the real in the core, in something like the actual like the Joe book, but this isn't. So if you're just a casual fan of it, this is like, again, this is going back. This isn't trying to modernize things and put them into a present day setting. There is a present day plot line in here, but things are very different at this point, and it's almost like, I guess you could say, like, one reason why G.I. Joe, to go back to that, wasn't really, just never really clicked. Like, what worked was when we brought it back when we did, 20 years ago. And it was close enough to that timeline where there were still these chances to, like, just get it going again. But they never got a cartoon series out that took off. They never got a, even after we lost it, the movies just never were, they just didn't hit right. And after a certain point, you get what I always call, like, the Buck Rogers syndrome, where something was very popular, had a lot of merchandise and stuff back in the day, eventually just becomes this thing that you get a poster on in your wall. A kid 40 years later has maybe a poster on their wall and thinks it was like a cool looking old retro thing, but it's not like they're collecting the stuff, it's just something people sort of know. And you run that risk. And if you try to bring that character into the modern day without just changing them unrecognizably, it hits a point where it doesn't work. So you might as well just create something new.
Yeah.
And it was, what Skybound's kind of done recently is probably, that was like the last chance anybody had to do that. And they're able to do it because they're just not even, they're modernizing it, but I think some of them, they've chosen correctly which parts is not to worry about. Like, some things are goofy and they're like, yep, well, that's just the way it is. It's a comic book. Get over it.
Well, I think the MCU showed us that we can be a little goofy and have a little fun. Not everything has to be so dark and serious all the time. Like, you can fight Thanos and then tell a joke afterwards. Like, yeah. And
I think, in this, you've got, I'm more interested too in, like, there's some fun modern topics and deal with, like, if you're going to have a story about over the top technology and top secret stuff and everything, there's like too much fun stuff now to play with. It's like, if you were going to create like a G.I. Joe-esque kind of a team today, what might you get inspiration from? So it's kind of more like that. Like, okay, here's my modern thing that I would do from scratch. Here's like a deconstruction of these like 80s archetypes that, fuck it, man, they're more 80s than they've ever been, I go crazy with it. And then you find out, it's kind of like, imagine if you joined, if you made it into the Navy SEALs and then you got offered to go into some real special Black Ops thing, and you learned all of a sudden you got the secret info, and there'd always been a rumor like about some crazy team, some crazy secret task force 40 years ago. But it sounds absurd. Like, yeah, man, there was like laser guns and like crazy fucking alien kind of people or whatever, and super villains, and you're like, what are you talking about? And then you find out it was all true. That's kind of more what I'm doing. And by the time we get into like the third issue, there's so much going on that it's clearly like it's a lot more. It's been completely removed from like being this what people would look at first and see the satire, but you got to let people know what the book's about at first.
So
you got to give them instant visual. You got to give them real easy visuals to like pull from at first to get it noticed.
Exactly. Don't judge a book by its cover unless it's a comic book. So I want to talk a little behind the scenes about like you're going to Kickstarter, why you're partnering up with Massive and everything. But before we do that, I got to ask, what's going on with this dude right here?
Oh man, he's quickly becoming like the fan favorite. He's already that's Blue Sky and Stormy. So Stormy is he's like the jetpack dude. Like, he has expertise in like this advanced jetpack equipment, and that's his little sidekick, his little sugar glider, because you have to have an animal that has no business going into combat as a sidekick. That's part of the rules.
Yeah, this I mean, I immediately go to squirrel. I don't know if that was the intent, but some sort of...
Everybody thinks he's a flying squirrel, which is, I think, going to become part of the joke where it's like, no, he's a sugar glider.
Yeah. But immediately caught my attention when I saw that cover, man. Immediately just like, flying squirrel. So...
I got to give credit. So that was idea when he drew that cover and sent it to me. This is clearly an homage to J. Scott Campbell's cover of G.I. Joe #1. But Tim sent that back. Like, this is not supposed to be this goofy, man. He's like, don't worry, people will like it. I said, fine. And he's right. Everybody's like, what is with this guy?
Yeah. So jumping into that, Disavowed's coming out on Kickstarter here, or actually, as you're all listening to this, it's on Kickstarter right now. So before we jump into stuff with Massive, I guess I know Devil's Due has done quite a bit with Kickstarter, and why Kickstarter? What's been the benefits that you guys have seen from doing Kickstarter campaigns from this for all of your books, but specifically for this?
I was probably, I don't know if I can say I was the first publisher, but I mean, I'm definitely one of the first. I might have been the first. I was all into the whole crowdfunding idea from day one. We did our first campaign in 2012. And then I just instantly, as a indie company who, like, when you're an indie player, even if you're pretty big, like, unless you're one of like the top like 5, 6, 7 companies, like, retailers are ordering your books that are not, but like they're not. You've still got to like build your fan base any way that you can. And I also saw, which now it's been proven right, that Kickstarter was just opening up to a whole new world of people who weren't necessarily going to the stores.
Mm-hmm.
Introducing new people to stuff that would then later carry. They might go to the store later, and it's just great because you get to find out who this group of people are who will not only be like some of your closest fans. Like, these people will literally support something before you even do it, and you have their email contacts later to get directly in hold of them to tell about your next project. And it's the most nuts and bolts like version that this comic business ever gets, where you're like, I sold something, I find people who like it, I get like a sales funnel, of supporters, and I can immediately contact them. It doesn't matter what social media platform's popular. It doesn't matter whatever else is trending. These people are following me. I can tell them about my stuff. And then, you can sell crazy stuff on there you could never, financially justify doing through any other market, because you can put stuff up there in a way that says, look, if you want it, here's the price, here it is, here's what it cost us to do. And if you don't, that's fine. And if we don't get enough raised, we won't do it. So that's what allows for like a lot of the special rewards and things and commission sketches and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then it lets you, like, what I did from the jump was time it so that it automatically wove in with the solicitation schedule. So if we had, a book coming out in, June, I would make sure the Kickstarter campaign was ending, in like March, in April, because I knew that like that means we would get our crowdfunding orders, and then like a couple weeks later we could also send the ad off to be put in the catalog, timed right, so that like while the campaign's running, the ad is in the catalog for the stores, and then the campaign ends, the month comes up where the stores have to place their orders, and we get everything at the same time. We send it all to print at the same time, and then we also carve off our Comic-Con stock on top of that. And it's great. It's just a simple, very nice model that is way more stable than you really ever get a chance to get in publishing. So it became its own little ecosystem, because you can try to do a lot of the same stuff through your email list and through your web store that you would do on Kickstarter, and it just doesn't work the same. For whatever reason, people like being on that platform. They like plugging for stuff. I think part of it gets into like, which is interesting with all of the concerns about AI, and is it going to, steal artists away from the world, or kill, the love of the desire for people to go out. I'm really stuttering around there. Sorry. concerns that it's going to disintermediate the artist.
Mm-hmm.
Kickstarter is kind of a good example that people want to know that they're helping or working with or supporting that artist. Like there's no better example that they just want the engagement. They want to be part of it. And it kind of makes you feel good doing that. Just
I feel
knowing
like
that
you're on
those
the
people
ground
are
floor.
there. Yeah, and as the artist, you're like, it's really powerful when you've done a campaign and you're sitting there like signing all these books. You might think like, oh man, that campaign was 300 people. That wasn't that much if it was a smaller campaign or something. But then you look at all these books laid out. You've got multiple covers and you got prints or whatever, and you're sitting there signing stuff for the whole day, and you realize, man, this is not insignificant. This is really cool. These people all individually came in and pledged for this, and then when you got a really big campaign, forget it. It's nuts. So it helps you, like, because you work in isolation most of the time, unless you go out to a con. You're always hearing like the struggles of the industry, and you see these orders come in after it's gone to the printer, and then the wholesale discounts have been taken, and then you get a random wire transfer or a check in the mail or something. Like, you're disconnected. So when you do those campaigns and you see that direct engagement, it is really cool. And it's, if you are coming in as a creator, that's really why you do this. Is like, just like, people like me, mom.
And mind you, everybody out there listening, the campaign as we're talking is not live. So you have it listed as volume 1. Is this going to be something that comes out issue to issue, or are you doing this like graphic novel to graphic novel? What can I expect to see once the campaign is live?
Yeah, so apologies to anybody who's like listening to this and if things change slightly before it posts, but at the very least, there should be like the pre-launch link that you can follow, so that you'll be notified upon launch. But we're going to be releasing a special edition of issue number 1 for our kickoff, and from there we'll be doing. Well, this is where I need to confirm with Massive exactly what's being rolled out. So, yeah, the idea is to kick off a special first issue, and then you have an opportunity to get everything else later. So if you are, we really want to encourage activity through the stores, and but at the same time, we do want, if people choose to just get everything this way, they can get something now, they can get the rest later, which will be more clear by the time you're watching this. And still some really big incentives for the comic shops as well. I think they've got some pretty cool ideas on how to kind of, like, the better the campaign does, the better our opportunities in the store are going to do. And that's one thing I like about Massive's creativity on some of these things.
Definitely, that's a good segue.
I can't talk about it yet.
That's a great segue to say, why team up with Massive? Like, you are a publisher in your own right. You've done a lot of great stuff throughout the industry, throughout your career. What does teaming up with Massive do for you as a creator and a publisher that you couldn't do without them?
Some of it, has to do with, like, just what I want personally as a creator. I've been publishing for a long time, and I really want to work on, if I'm going to transition into just getting out of focusing on so much just the publishing, more on my own stuff. It's got to happen at some point. Coming out of COVID, our distribution was kind of like sort of like scattered around, and I was kind of looking around at like what opportunities there were if we were to sort of change how we did things, and noticed Massive was doing everything. They were doing everything different than everyone else. It kind of came out of nowhere, working closely with Whatnot. Had huge success that first year or two. I liked the way they were approaching their crowdfunding campaigns that I saw, like with Zorro, and so they were on my radar. And then they actually approached me though. Originally came to me about possibly doing an imprint, which then over the course of like over 6 months, maybe almost a year, that was like a back and forth conversation. It ended up sort of being like deciding to focus on this one title, um, and and then but yeah, in that interim too, I decided like I'm going to start to focus on Devil's Due more as a studio. I'm not trying to build it back up as like some huge publisher, and it's just really personal. I mean, if you're gonna be, especially the landscape is so different now. Like, um, really now it's more competitive than ever, and if you're gonna really blow up like and carve your own niche, you either have to have a ton of money coming in from outside sources, or you have to like you have to find some void like I did back then. You just find a huge void that no one else quite sees, the players to be, and you can make a huge splash. And uh, I just, well, I mean, once you get it up and running, then like you have to have this mix of books. You have to have like some licensed stuff. Like that's just necessary to be in the game. You got to get some really like you got to have a mix of like creator own stuff, and you have to have your own IP that you own. And you're that's your job. You're trying to get every book you can. You're trying to keep market share, and I just don't really want to do that the rest of my life. I want to focus on books, and I've got, we had a good, while all the challenges that were happening along those lines with COVID and lockdowns, I had good stuff going on with a lot of my personal titles. I had progress on the film side with Mercy Sparks, set up another sci-fi project, and then recently set up another sci-fi project with some different networks and stuff. So that's, we'll see if anything ever happens there, but it's, it's when I focus on my own creative, my own creations or collaborations, it has a good track record when I ever put my, focus on it. So time for more of that.
Yeah, so just focusing more on your own personal creative output as opposed to publishing other people's stuff.
And then on the massive side, they know that I can pretty much do literally every single thing from scratch that would be required to publish a book. And so it's kind of like, our arrangement is a little back and forth on how much do they want me to do versus how much is, they running the show on. So it's, hopefully they just know they can pretty much just be handed a book that's basically ready to go. And I'm really enjoying having like help on the marketing side, just like setting these interviews up and, some of the ideas they're coming up with. And people haven't even really seen, some of the fun stuff we're going to be doing. One thing I can talk about that I really like, because it's already indicated in the preview ashcan that we released at Comic-Con, is that beyond this story, and just getting to read and enjoy that, we're continuing to play outside of it and treat this like this was a brand that actually existed in the 80s. Meaning like there's different waves of fandom that have existed over the years. There were toys back in the day. There was a 2000s resurgence of this property that everyone has an opinion about. And there were old public service announcements and just a whole library of stuff. So I can it's funny because it kind of took on a life of its own internally as we were just having fun with it, and just thought it'd be a way to, fans to have something to have fun with after they read the book, and maybe even contribute some stuff themselves. But then it actually helped me in writing the story because I have so many characters that you could never put them all in a team book like this. There's just too many characters, and you have to really focus on just a core crew. It lets me still have fun with that because I can now show off. Maybe a character appears in the book, and then I can just put a little blurb about them somewhere. We can actually put them in the background of a fun PSA or a little fake toy thing or something like that. Like, oh, remember that guy? So that'll be cool.
Those are always fun. The fake ads, like maybe you do one that kind of pokes fun at the more you know or no, they're not the more you know. It was
Oh, we are.
knowing
There
it,
is the
knowing's half the
what?
battle or something like that. I'm GI Joe fans are really mad at me right now.
Well, I might want to see something we have called "You Don't Know the Half of It."
Yeah. So
So
that's
we're playing with. I love the idea that so in those PSAs you had kids just to always encounter like these grown adults, and it's like all of a sudden it's also like half the time like why was this adult just hanging out around these kids in the middle of the woods? So what I'm playing with is it's just kids running into like these crazy traumatic scenes of violence and all these things happening. Uh, and then the adult just tries to impart some kind of lesson on them at the worst time.
oh man, that sounds awesome. So Josh, you've been super generous with your time, so I don't want to keep you too much longer. But before we close everything off, people can go look at the Kickstarter page. But where's the best place to send them to follow you personally in all those future creative endeavors that you're teasing throughout this?
Yeah, you can follow me personally on Instagram at Blaylock Comics and on Twitter at Josh Blaylock. There is a Facebook group for the Disavowed. It's just the Disavowed official comic group. There are my Facebook account's temporarily disabled, and hopefully that's getting turned back on soon. But so
Share
right,
spicy
primarily
memes.
interacting. They won't tell me what happened, so but they like to be real secretive about it. They but yeah, go follow all the massive socials, and also there is the link to the crowdfunding campaign. Hopefully, it's the Kickstarter pre-launch page that we can share here, and also just devilsdo.net. That's my website, where you can also subscribe to the email list and get updates there.
And to everybody out there, all you lovely people watching and or listening to this right now, you should know what's going on by now. In the show notes down below, I'll have links to all of Josh's stuff. Most importantly, the Kickstarter page, so that you can go check out the Disavowed and hopefully follow it and then eventually pledge to it. Josh, the book sounds awesome, man. I look forward to checking it out myself, and just best of luck with the campaign.
Thanks, man. Really appreciate it.